Hi, and welcome to Watch Next, the podcast where we recommend what you should watch next. I'm Dr. Rubi Sanchez Lozoya. Each episode, join me in a conversation with fascinating scholars and thinkers to explore world cinema in a way that feels warm, inviting, and completely jargon-free. Today, we sit down with Deborah Beck to discuss Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Deborah Beck is a professor of classics and Christian Stanley E. Adams Jr. Centennial Professor in Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin. Her research focuses on how classical epic poetry tells a good story that connects emotionally with its audiences, primarily Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. For her latest project, she's writing a new book, Visionary Women, about 4 passionate women artists, their art, and their fans through the ages. The book discusses Sappho, Hildegard of Bingen, Emily Dickinson, and Frida Kahlo. Since we will be discussing the film in detail throughout the episode, consider this your spoiler reminder. And with that, let's begin. Deborah, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Thank you for joining us here at the studio. It's the first time we have a guest in the studio, so I'm excited to see how the dynamic is going to be.
Yeah.
What do you think of the film just before we dive into it?
Well, I had seen it in a theater when it was first released, but I hadn't seen it or really thought about it since then. And I was really excited to see it again and see how it looked a second time. And I think I enjoyed it, broadly speaking, in the same way that I enjoyed it the first time, where I thought these are fabulously vivid and magnetic characters. Mm-hmm. This is a stunningly gorgeous physical environment with the clothes are very lived in, and you can sort of feel your body wearing them and all kinds of stuff. The ocean smells like salt and so forth. And at the same time, the boundaries of this world are so sharp and so circumscribed. Like within those boundaries, it's an extraordinarily vivid world. And then outside of that, you have almost no idea what's going on at all. So I remembered that it was very stimulating and fun to sort of go back to that place. I was also really interested by the extent to which I forgot almost everything specific that happened. So I had this very vivid recollection of the sort of mood and look of the movie. But I kept on thinking as things were happening in the plot, I kept going, oh, wow, I forgot about that completely. Oh, really? Okay. So that was kind of interesting how much my brain had just forgotten everything that actually happened in the story.
When you were thinking back about this movie, and one of the reasons we wanted to discuss it with you was because of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that as part of the movie or not at all?
No, that came as a complete surprise to me.
Oh, interesting.
In a sufficiently gigantic way that I'm actually not sure I even noticed it the first time. I mean, the way that episode kind of unfolded, at first I wasn't sure whether they were talking about a specific retelling of that story, and it wasn't until there's a shot of the actual page. Somehow Ovid gets named. Either somebody says that or there's a page that says Ovid Metamorphoses on it. And then I thought, oh, it's that Eurydice.
Okay, this is very, very exciting. So, as Deborah, you're mentioning, this is a story from Greek literature. And when we were thinking about what film to discuss with you, and thinking as your professor of classics, the first thing that came to mind was the epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And, and you're making a face for the listeners out there. So because of those, then I started thinking, of the Indian epics, right? The Ramayana and the Mahabharata, of which there are many retellings and adaptations in film as well. So my first incline was to think of Bahubali and Bahubali 2. But in your questionnaire, you said, that you are for 3-hour-long movies. You have seen Bollywood before. You're a big fan of Shah Rukh Khan. So we have immediately bonded with that.
Yay.
But it was, you were something shorter would have been best for this. And I'm actually really glad we ended up with this film. And for the listeners, just a reminder that Portrait of a Lady on Fire is a 2019 French historical romantic drama written and directed by Céline Sciamma. It follows the story of painter Marianne, who is commissioned to secretly paint a wedding portrait of Eloise, who is a young noble woman reluctant to marry. And in the process, at the time of painting and spending more time together, they actually fall in love. In the film, we find several references to Orpheus and Eurydice, including a scene in which the two women and another servant girl are gathered together and they hear Eloise read the story to them. So this might be a question that you get asked all the time, but why do you think we go back to Greek literature a lot, even after so much time has passed?
Well, I think one of the big reasons is the same reason that the Greeks themselves thought mythology was a good thing to think with. So of the 80-something Greek tragedies that are extant, only one of them tells the story of a historical event. It's about the Persian War, and it's the earliest surviving Greek tragedy. And there's a story of a tragedian producing a play about a recent historical event in which the Athenians had suffered a military defeat. And the audience was so upset by the play that they fined him some staggering amount of money and forbade the play ever to be reperformed in a culture where it was very standard for plays to be reperformed if people enjoyed them. And so in that context, mythology as the basis for tragic storytelling, which was a very fundamental part of the civic texture, the civic fabric of Athenian life, it was performed in the center of the city. These plays were part of the civic life. And, rich Athenians would pay for the production. They would pay for the chorus's costumes and all that sort of thing. And ordinary citizens who didn't have enough money to do something like that would be actors in the chorus. So like they would be and they would serve as jury members, which is a recognizable form of civic service that we still have. But they also would serve in choruses of Athenian tragic plays. So it's like, today, yes, you can fulfill your civic duty by being called for jury duty, or you can go be an extra in a play at the Zach Theater, which is like clearly nonsense in a modern framework. And so most Athenian dramas have some kind of connection to the contemporary world. And so for some of them, we don't actually know the date at which they were performed. But for others, we definitely do. And we can see clear but implicit connections between what the story's about mythologically and what's happening in the world. So to take one example, Euripides writes a play called The Trojan Women, which is about the moment when Troy has fallen. And it focuses on the grief and the imminent enslavement of noble Trojan women, the mother of Hector, the prince of Troy, the widow of the king of the city. And the Athenians themselves at the time were engaged in a very vicious war against some other Greeks, which they ultimately lost. And it's impossible to read that play, let alone, I imagine, for a contemporary audience to see it or act in it, without thinking about what the Athenians themselves were inflicting on the women of the cities that they were fighting against. If you go out on the stage and you say, it's bad the way we're killing these other Greeks, you're going to get fined and your play's never going to be reperformed again. But if you go out there and you perform a venerable mythological story that has a kind of a degree of remove from what we're experiencing right now, then you can think with that and you can talk about the issues it raises in a way that you don't feel personally implicated. And I think that's one of the reasons that people continue to engage with these stories is even though some parts of them are just kind of out there, like, monsters or whatever it is, the specific themes and dilemmas and experiences that people have in mythological stories are very recognizable. They're kind of transcultural. They're human experiences.
Right.
And so to take the example of Orpheus and Eurydice, Orpheus is this incredible guy. He's the guy that starts humans off being musicians and poets. And that power over language doesn't give him the power over his own emotions and that he would have needed in order not to become permanently separated from his wife. Right. It doesn't give him the power to prevent her stepping on the snake that killed her in the first place. And there are tons of stories like this that in various ways explore the limits of our own power as humans.
Yes.
If we're this amazing singer Orpheus, if we're the incredible warrior Achilles, if we're Odysseus, if we're whoever we are, that's this, big fancy mythological hero, we still end up in the same human quandaries that people experience where death is going to come. You're going to be separated from your loved ones and you're going to be sad about it. And that's not something that even the gods can get out of.
This is so fascinating. I'm so excited. What I'm hearing you saying is that what we get through the Greek myths is that it is a way that we explain ourselves to ourselves.
Yes, very much so.
But also with some kind of distance.
Yes.
Right? I think there's something very difficult sometimes to look at our reality, and we need that distance either by putting it in the sense of a myth, but also by putting it in a form, like an art form, a song, a play, a film. I'm very curious to talk more with you about this idea of the limits of our own power. In my class, when I talk about one of the biggest romances, the question I have for them with my students is that why is the romance story such a good vehicle to talk about the limits of society? And I think it's precisely because of this. You put a story of romance, and it is a story of a couple fighting against something in the system. Sometimes it's the class divide, caste divide, religion divide. But in this case, it's really the idea of, in Orpheus and Eurydice, the limits of humanity, right? And it is about, I think the film does this too in Portrait, which is about inaccessible places. Hades is an inaccessible place, and Orpheus defies this. And the women here are defying the roles, the paths that they can take. So one of the ways I was thinking of these inaccessible places is, if you're a woman of this period or of this setting, it's an either or. You're in the home or outside of the home. And if you're in the path of the home, then you cannot access this other space, which is what happens towards the end. The moment that she becomes a wife and a mother, she is inaccessible to her, who has become a painter. And the other layer, too, is that you said about Orpheus and the power of language. I never thought of him as language. I thought of him more of music. But she's also an artist. Right? This is also the parallel that they have.
Right. And for a Greek, I mean, you're absolutely right that Orpheus, the power of Orpheus comes from his music. So like in Ovid's poem that they're reading from, there are these stories where like he's playing on his lyre and the stones want to roll over and hear what he's doing and stuff like that. Ancient Greek poetry always had a musical accompaniment. So for the ancient audience, the separation between music and words was not as clear and sharp as it is for us today. And I think I said that partly because there are other kinds of stories that I keep in my head next to Orpheus, where a power over language is connected very closely with your power over yourself. So Odysseus is an example of a character whose heroic quality, so to speak, is that he's able to conceal himself. He's able to pretend that he's somebody else for long periods of time, which most epic heroes in the Iliad and the Odyssey absolutely are not able to do, because their heroicness depends on running around bragging about who they are and having everybody be impressed. And so Odysseus is not only not doing that, but for almost half of the Odyssey, he's disguised as a poor old beggar who's wearing rags, which is a heroic act in its own way, that he's able to maintain that pretense. And part of the way that he does that is through his command of language and his command of himself.
So is Orpheus in the myth composer both of the lyrics and the song? Or like music and lyrics?
I'm so glad you asked this. So the Metamorphoses is a very narratively complex poem. And it has many levels of narration. And Orpheus is one of many examples where there are sort of stacked layers of narration, where there's the narrating voice of the poem, who's describing to you a character, who in turn is telling a story which is quoted directly, so that you're kind of 2 layers away from the narrating voice. And Orpheus is one of those. So we start out in the Metamorphoses with chaos and the creation of the world. And then the first third is largely gods doing various things. And then the middle chunk is a lot of heroes doing a lot of things. I mean, these aren't hard and fast rules. It's sort of a broad tendency. And then at the beginning of book 11, I think that's where it is anyway, in the last third of the poem, Orpheus dies, and then we're sort of turning our attention more towards regular people and sometimes even historical people.
Can you fill in the gap for us of like what is the whole story? So at this moment in the film, we are more than halfway through. Eloise and Marianne have become lovers. There's also a third girl who's a servant girl, and the 3 of them are gathered to listen to Eloise read from a book. And the book that she's reading, or the story that she's reading, is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice towards the end of the story. You're mostly in close-up. You're mostly looking at their faces as if they're beautifully lit. The whole picture looks like a painting. Like, it's a gorgeous film to look at. But it's also like grabs you in as you were also listening to the story for the first time. And it's obviously a retelling of the story. I feel like it's probably a little bit condensed. It's also written in French. But I like that they also have a moment of conversation of like kind of interpreting it together. And that the question the interpretation or the reading that Marianne has is like, oh, this is not a choice of a lover, it's a choice of a poet, which I'm very curious to hear your take on it. And really, like, the girl immediately is like, immediately blaming him for what he's done, right? It's like he's being a fool, he's being impatient. Why did he do this? But then the three of them are kind of piecing it together. It's like, what if Eurydice was the one that kind of prompted it? Can you tell us a little bit more of what happens at the moment in the story? Because what I remember it is, and I think it's also what's interesting about myth, there's a story, but also how you remember a story. And you don't know if it's the versions of the story, that they're different throughout time.
Yeah, there's lots of versions of virtually every story. And then individual tellers make up their own things for the stories that they tell.
The one I remember is that throughout the whole time, and tell me if this is true or not, throughout the whole time, Eurydice is kind of being attacked, like kind of being pushed back, or like she's being bitten or whatever. Like basically the reason that he turns back is because he actually wants to make sure that she's okay, or that they actually, one of the ways he gets tricked into thinking that there's going to be light. So he thinks that he already reached the end, and he thinks, oh, we made it, and he goes back and tells her we made it, and then she's being pulled back.
My recollection... And I didn't reread the story before I came here. So the last time I read it was several years ago. I think what happens in Ovid is that it's very quiet. And he's not sure she's really there. And he turns around because he's just like, he's overcome by temptation or he's overcome by who knows what, some human failing, temptation, doubt, insecurity, something. He doesn't have the faith that Sophie is so mad at him for not having. And where the light comes into it in Ovid, I think, is he can see the light. So we know he almost made it. So that's a more poignant kind of failure than if he'd gotten 3 steps out of Hades on the way back to the land of the living and he just flopped right away. Then we're just like, oh, well, that just was not meant to be. Whereas if they get almost to the finish line and then he turns... When we can see the light, it's like this sort of suspense. So you're like, he almost made it. And I think that's one of the things that's really fun and interesting about the traditional stories that are told over and over again in Greek mythology is that there's very definitely suspense, even though we know how it ends.
Right.
So even though we know the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, every time we hear it, there's part of us that's hoping that this time he won't look back.
Right.
Or she won't get bitten by the snake.
Right.
Or whatever.
What I like about this is because the film also kind of replicates this idea of playing with the memory or like this retelling in like maybe this time it will be different because they replicate this moment in the film when Marianne is about to leave and is going to leave Eloise behind. Eloise is there the last time that she says the last time that she saw me is when she was in her, what we can imagine is her wedding gown at the bottom of the stairs, lit in a almost ghostly, haunting way. And she says, turn back. And then Marianne looks at her for the last time. But then we have almost like an epilogue towards the end where after the gallery is shown, she sees her painting. And then we see her at the end in a long take of her taking in the music. I did feel that hope of like, maybe she will turn, right? Even though she has told us she did not see me because the take was so long. I was just hoping maybe this time it will be different. Maybe she will turn.
Yeah.
So I think it tells us about this kind of like, like even though we know how it's going to end, we hope against hope.
We do. We get in there with the characters. And I think we experience that today. People rewatch movies or television shows or whatever that they love. And, for example, I'm in the middle of watching Stranger Things for the first time. And, I was a teenager in the 80s, so I'm absolutely grooving on all of this 80s nostalgia. And I'm sure there are people who rewatch it because they're interested in like finding all these little fandom details or whatever. And I'm sure that those people rewatching it are still feeling the scary moments.
Right.
That the scary moments don't stop being scary just because they're happening. I mean, the same thing happens if you go to the summer movie series down at the Paramount when they show the Hitchcock movies, which I love doing at the Paramount because not only because they're so much more awesome in huge size, but because it is so fun when the whole theater goes at the scary moments. Like everybody's scared, even though half the people there, if not more, have seen the movie before, and you're all scared together. And so that just is, one of the pleasures of seeing a movie, even if you've seen it before. The suspense isn't what's going to happen. you're sort of in that moment with the characters where you simultaneously know what's going to happen and you're with the characters who don't know what's going to happen.
And I think this is pretty much spot on of what adaptation and retelling is. Going beyond the text, but like, how can we breathe new life to it, right? And I think as adaptations that are not completely quote-unquote loyal have that incredible potential to them.
Yeah.
In this, I find it interesting that you talk about this as a theme of failure, and the women in the story of the film, they think about it as a choice.
Yes.
That's fascinating. It's a completely different take on it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's because in Ovid, I don't think it is presented as a choice. I think the sort of feeling, the mental image that I have in my head of the Orpheus and Eurydice story, which is told other places also.
Right.
So Orpheus and Eurydice is also a very important story in Virgil's Georgics, which was written shortly before Ovid's Metamorphoses. And my recollection of it is that it's presented not as a choice, either explicitly as not a choice, as a kind of almost against his will he did this, or else the issue of volition isn't mentioned at all. To a great extent, it's a story about human limitations.
Right.
And we can make all kinds of whatever choice we want. We're not going to escape the limitations that we have as mortals.
I think the film takes that take as well. I think it understands that the limitations that these women have are those limitations of gender, right? You can either
Very much so.
be married, like you can be inside the home or outside the home. You can be married and have children, or you have to reject and jettison all of that and then kind of find your own way and just become a painter
and I think
or
Sophie
whatever.
also offers another sort of angle on that, which is that lower class people have a different set of constraints. So like she's clearly both inside the house as the servant and outside the house. There's no man in the house that could have impregnated her.
But she was.
Well, exactly. We don't know who impregnated her. We don't know if that effort at aborting the pregnancy was successful. Once she has that, when it goes to that woman to try to end the pregnancy, we never find out whether that was successful. And to me, the way that Sophie responds to the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice and the way she's so angry at Orpheus, I feel like all three of those women were experiencing the story through their own romantic experiences. And so Sophie, clearly, to me anyway, has some kind of axe to grind with the completely absent father of her child. And somehow that's indirectly coming out in what she says about Orpheus. But since we know nothing about this person, there's no way for us to make any kind of clearer or more precise connection there. And it's very obvious that both Marianne and Eloise are mapping the experience of that final separation between Orpheus and Eurydice onto what they know lies in store for them.
Yes. I mean, I think that's brilliant. And this is why I'm very excited to do this podcast and have these conversations, because I am guilty. I did not think about Sophie at all. I was just thinking of okay, this is she and this is she's Orpheus and she's Eurydice. And you're presenting a third choice, because absolutely, these are nonetheless the choices of the privileged women. Right? And Sophie has neither of those choices. And absolutely, you're right. She's both inside the home and outside the home because there's no other fate for her. That's such a brilliant reading of it.
Oh, hooray. Well, I mean, that was one of the things that sort of waved its hand at me during the movie and said, wait, what happened to that? So throughout the storyline with Sophie, there's sort of how did Sophie end up on the island to begin with?
Right.
Who impregnated her?
Right.
Did the attempt to end the pregnancy succeed? Where did she go after Eloise left the island? I had questions like that about various other things. I mean, about that feast that just kind of happens randomly in the middle of the movie. I was like, what's the occasion? A feast means that there was some kind of occasion. What was the occasion? I completely agree that the primary form of limitation, kind of penning in, cooping up, that the movie is about gender, but I think it's also really interested in class.
I'm very fascinated by this because I haven't thought much about it, which makes me want to watch the film again, because you're absolutely right. How does this pregnancy happen in the first place when we don't see men at all throughout the movie, which is also one of the very fascinating elements of it. We only see them when Marianne is like brought into the island, and then when she has to leave. But for the most part, it's a completely female-run island.
Yeah.
And the moment that we see it, perhaps it's most magical, is the bonfire moment. What I like about that, and then the painting of the stopping the pregnancy. To me, the film felt about two main things. One is about the act of looking and the act of watching, but also is about the act of knowledge production, of like the way that this painting could not have existed at any other circumstance but this one. So for a female director to make a movie about women making art felt like a very poignant thing to say about these are things that are captured, perhaps not in the books, not in the formal, the one that we actually see as knowledge, but this painting is a way of producing knowledge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could make a really interesting way to kind of apply that to the movie is that painting at the very beginning in that scene where there's all those women painting and Marianne is sort of running an atelier or whatever she's doing. And one of the students brings out this painting of a woman whose dress is on fire.
Yes.
Which you find out much later is perhaps a representation of that moment at the bonfire where Eloise's whose dress is that? One of them. Their dress catches on fire and it's put out and it's fine.
It's Eloise's.
That's what I thought. Yeah, it's Eloise's dress catches on fire and they put it out and it's fine. But this was one of the questions that I had, not about the movie itself, but about the title.
Yes.
Because I don't know if Portrait of a Lady on Fire means that the portrait is on fire, which happens in the movie, or the lady is on fire, which also happens in the movie. I think I would love it for it to be intentionally ambiguous, which or both of those is on fire, because it could mean either, to my reading.
I think it's both, and which is it's a little bit of a like not satisfying answer, but I think it's both. I relate it to the myth because it is the painting that dooms Eloise, because Marianne did her job of painting her a wedding portrait. Now she's going to get married, and therefore she is now doomed to be in this in her own hellscape, with a place that she doesn't want to be. In the same way that Orpheus dooms Eurydice to go back to Hades.
Yeah.
And the only thing that she could do is set the painting on fire, which she kind of does at some moment.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's another way in which the movie is kind of, I don't want to say collapsing the distinction between the woman and the portrait, but inviting us to ask ourselves, how different are those things? What is the relationship between them?
No, but I think it is. I think in collapsing, that's a word I would use, because the woman is the portrait insofar as like which is what Marianne says when they're reading the myth, is that he chooses a memory of her instead of her.
Yeah.
So what do I have of her once she's gone? It's just the memory of her, the painting of her. And they do this for each other, right? It's like, you have a painting of me, but I don't have a painting of you. Marianne hides a picture of herself in a book that she carries, that later on in the painting, she sees that it's like in the page as a way of almost telling you, if you ever see this, and I don't know if you will, but I'm still thinking about you.
Yeah.
But it's also a way of keeping the secret knowledge of women again, right?
Yeah.
Hidden within the books, right? There's this other knowledge, this other world that you cannot access.
Yeah. And even though Ovid is a very violent poet, the poem in which that story is told also includes a lot of stories that include sexual assault, some of which is quite gruesome. He's also a poet that has, I think, a great deal of sympathy for his female characters. I think there's a degree of appropriateness in using Ovid. There are other sources of that story that could have been used. He was very interested in art and in representation, and he was very sympathetic to women. I don't think you need to know any of that in order to appreciate the scene, but I think what we do know about Ovid and about the poem in which that story appears deepens and enriches the conversation between Ovid's version of the story and these characters and their art.
No, absolutely. The other scene I wanted to talk to you about is the ending.
Yeah.
What do you think of the ending?
I think the ending is fantastic. I hadn't remembered the scene in the gallery at all. I sort of had this vague recollection that she sees a painting of Eloise with a child, but I had forgotten everything about the context of that. And I love the juxtaposition of seeing her in the painting where she can see that, I mean, she has this like embodied proof that the marriage happened with the child in the picture. And I I loved the way in which I didn't feel like either of the women were destroyed or heartbroken. I felt like both of them were vibrantly alive.
Yes.
And that the other one was a sort of presence in their life in the kind of way that retelling of the Ovid story seemed to point at. That Orpheus made the poet's choice to keep the memory for always. And I felt like both of them in different ways were represented as living with a very vibrant and living memory of the other one. So whereas I had remembered the movie as being this tragic story of love and loss, when I watched it again, I thought, well, they did lose each other in the kind of concrete physical sense, but it's clear that the tie between them endures. We see both of them very powerfully emotionally connected to the other one without the other one being there. Because even though in that last scene in the concert hall where Marianne can see Eloise when she's listening to the music that she played on the piano when they were together and then forgot the end of it and was frustrated, and there we're going back to Orpheus again, even though they're physically in the same place, because Eloise is the emotional focus and she doesn't know that Marianne is there, it's as though she were alone because she thinks she is. And so that scene is not about any kind of present time relationship between the two of them. It's about the way in which Eloise lives with the memory of her love for Marianne. And I thought this sort of symmetrical way in which that happened, where we first see Marianne, the present tenseness of Marianne's love for Eloise and her response to a painting, which is what she does. And then we see Eloise responding in this very aristocratic setting with the box and the whatever else that she's sitting in to a performance of a piece of music that they had shared. The sort of parallel sort of way that there's a form of art.
Yes.
Like
I see.
Brings to life each of them for the other.
Oh, so nice.
In a way that their love for each other is very clearly alive now. Today, I think this is partly because I'm old and middle-aged, and so I don't have the young person's idea that if your loved one is physically gone, that they have disappeared from your life.
Right.
I experienced it this time as this is a real force in these women's lives.
I mean, I think it's such a beautiful readings that you have given us. I think it's a beautiful reading that they see themselves through a piece of painting or through a piece of music, right? They are, in a sense, mediated, or there's something in between because they literally don't see each other. But the presence of the piece of art, be it a painting or be it a piece of music, becomes the stand-in for the presence of the person, the physical presence, which in a sense it is true, right? Yeah. The way we think of memories of people that are gone is that way. I subscribe to that idea a lot, that a person might not be physically present there anymore, but your memory is important. At the end of the day, what is life is not a collection of memories. I like the reading of that moment a lot. What do you think of it being the same piece that she listened to her for the first time in a very out-of-tune piano, incomplete, without an orchestra, right? It's like the most bare bones moment of there. And what I liked about, let me answer my question. What did I like about it? What I liked about it is that I think what I could see of her reactions, because we stayed with her in close-up for a long time, is other than the fact that I think, okay, she's going to turn maybe, even though they told us that she won't, is that you can see throughout the whole time that we're looking at her is that you see the changes of her emotions on her face.
Yes.
The recognition of the song, and it just builds up, it's like very overwhelming. To me, when I was reading on her face was like, oh my God, this is a song that I heard with her the first time. I'm thinking about her. Oh, it was not a great song when she played it, but nonetheless, I really, really, really cherish this moment that we had together and how much larger this is. And I wish she was here. And the only way I can listen to this for the first time, which is what I wanted all this time, I had to go to Royal Church to listen to music, is to get married to, so not be with her. So there's conflicting emotions of I can experience this because I cannot be with her. I think that was done very nicely.
No, I do too. I mean, I thought it was so striking. I mean, both of their faces were so expressive.
Yes.
And never more so than in those two scenes where we can see that both of them, I mean, those are not speaking scenes.
Yes.
We're just seeing them look or listen to this very meaningful art thing that brings the beloved to mind. And their faces are sort of like so transparent and so expressive in communicating this process of recognition. In, the first thing I think that Marianne recognizes, of course, is the presence of the small child in the painting. But then she sees that Eloise is holding this copy of Ovid. And I think where I noticed that it was specifically Ovid, whose version it was when she's drawing on the page. I think there was a header on the page that said Metamorphoses. Anyway, getting back to what I was thinking about in terms of the way that their faces communicate this process where they engage with the art as a process, so Marianne is seeing the child, and then she sees the hand, and then she sees the book, and then she sees the page number. And you can see this kind of gradual recognition of what that represents coming over her face. And it's her face is communicating joy, I think. And in a different story, her face would communicate grief or regret. And similarly with Eloise's face when she's listening to the music, even though she's crying, she's also smiling.
Yes.
And she, I think, is joyful also. So to me, the way she looked when she was listening to that music is, I think she is grief-stricken for the loss of that version of herself. The version of herself that had that idyll with Marianne. But I think she also, at the same time, through that piece of music, the piece of music itself and the joy that brings her, as well as the memory of what that happiness with Marianne felt like when she was in it, I don't exactly know how to weigh those two things against each other. They sort of coexist.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's very human also, right? That like all of the sort of major things we do in life have trade-offs.
Yes.
And so, she gets to, as you said, she gets to hear this beautiful musical performance, which if she was stuck on this remote island would never have happened.
Yes, absolutely. There are definitely so many more things that we could talk about, and we might have to do it after the recording. Are you ready for your quick fire questions?
Sure.
Okay, so these quick fire questions are just to get to know you a little bit better. Favorite movie snack?
Oh gosh, favorite movie snack? Twizzlers, but I can't eat too many of them.
Movie theater or streaming?
Depends on the movie.
Trailers or no spoilers?
Trailers without spoilers.
I'm with you with that. Movie you would like to see again for the first time?
Star Wars, the original Star Wars.
Oh, nice. Movie you watch way too young?
Psycho.
Oh, wow. How old were you?
I don't remember, but I was terrified.
One of your favorite movies?
One of my favorite movies?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the favorite, just one of them.
Some Like It Hot.
One film that is required watching or that you think everybody should watch?
My husband will kill me for saying this. Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Why?
He doesn't think it's funny at all.
Wow.
Actually, that's actually not true. I made him watch it when we were dating, and he was not a fan at all. And we recently visited some friends, and for no reason that I can understand whatsoever, the husband decided, at 9:00 the night before we were going to go home, that we were going to watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And my husband said, "Oh, okay." And he thought it was much funnier that time. I don't know why.
Well,
he still wouldn't choose it. But anyway, yeah.
Well, thank you, Deborah, so much.
Thank you. This was super fun.
It was so much fun having you. Thank you for listening to Watch Next. A huge thanks to our guests for joining us today, and to everyone at Lates and at UT Austin's College of Liberal Arts and the Department of Asian Studies for making this show possible. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Leave us a rating or a review to help other listeners discover the filmmakers and scholars we feature. New episodes drop every 2 weeks. Listen to Watch Next wherever you get your podcasts.